Today on The State of Us, moving from Ohio to New York City. Is that really a wise choice? You're alive, there's air in your lungs. It's the 21st century in the United States of America. There's 330 million people here. And you think, I'm going to move from the great state of Ohio to the best city in the world, New York City. Now, is that a smart financial decision or is it crazy? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. Welcome to the State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal, and the honorary host for this show, Mr. Lance Jackson.
Yeah, I'm getting the host, so stay tuned, folks. This ought to be a wild ride.
That's what I'm hoping
this
for.
Is an
This
is an article that Justin picked out, and then all of a sudden I get to lead the discussion. But it's an
Just
interesting
like the good old
one.
days.
Yeah, it's an interesting one here. Young man and his wife. He says here, we'll just start. His name is Will Flanagan. And he said, Will Flanagan. And he said, for 3 years, I was more financially secure and stable than I have ever been. We'll get into his past later. My wife and I bought our first home, made prudent investments, and our savings account finally grew into 4 digits. We settled in a 2,000 square foot colonial near Cleveland, Ohio, in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets. We had a backyard with a garden. We parked our car in the garage. We both had in-home offices and worked remotely full-time. We even took our first vacation together. After 10 years of marriage, lots of sacrifices, and 2 cross-country moves, we finally nabbed the elusive, quote, American dream. Then earlier this year, we gave it all up. Most people would call us crazy or maybe desperate, but we decided to leave the suburbs and move to New York City. That's right, New York City, where they do have salsa. All right. And he says, now here's the thing. He said, I figured our moving expenses would be $20,000, including the movers, the broker's fees, security deposit, first month's rent, and a stay in the city while we're looking for an apartment. Not to mention, and here's where we're going to start getting into it, not to mention the cost of living in New York City is 161% higher than in Cleveland, according to NerdWallet. To put it in perspective, our mortgage in Cleveland for a 2,000 foot home that they were actually, getting some rewards for was $1,150 a month, including taxes. While the median monthly rental for a 1-bedroom Manhattan apartment is $4,250, according to the most recent Douglas Eilman and Miller Samuel report. He said, I grew up as a latchkey kid from the Rust Belt Appalachia coal country just south of Youngstown, Ohio.
Hey.
He said, I'm familiar with financial hardship. I am the son of a single mother who worked in manufacturing, but unfortunately, my mom fell victim to layoffs on multiple occasions while I was growing up. I watched her from having a solidly lower middle class career to transforming into a gas station attendant on food stamps seemingly overnight. We didn't talk much about finances, but I know what financial stress looks like. Chain smoking at the coffee table with past due envelopes and collection pending envelopes in front of you. Financial ruin sounds like an answering machine full of last warnings and ultimatums. And for those of you like Levi, an answering machine was something that we had back in the old days where the phone would ring, and if you weren't home, people could leave a message on the machine, and then you could come home and play the messages. I know that, you've got phones now that do that, but we actually had a machine that was separate from your phone. So just so you can follow the story. He said, then I tried to pay my way through college with Pell Grants. 7 years after I started and $50,000 in student loan debt, I quit school and began working full time. Even after I left school, I worked full time for an arts magazine. I was barely making $12,000 a year. And after 9 months, I was so much in debt that I quit. I applied anywhere I could, including McDonald's. My wife and I even lived in the basement of a Presbyterian church and showered from a bucket. I've dodged repo men, begged with collection agencies, and stared into a refrigerator with nothing in it but bologna and potatoes.
So you like this story?
He came up, well, right, because he achieved the dream, right? I mean, he can't, he watched his mom suffer. He loved his mom. She worked hard for him. She put a roof over his head, and she had, really couldn't make ends meet. So he decided to go to college, find a way to do it, work in 2 jobs while he went to class, didn't graduate, but went after his dream of working in, and he sacrificed, right? I mean, he's lived without nothing so he could make it as a writer. Mr. Flanagan is an editor in the Wall Street Journal. All right. He's a writer. He's now working for the Wall Street Journal, and he's living in New York City. He had everything he never had, right? In his own words, I achieved the American dream and I gave it all up.
Why?
Well, why would you do that?
Well, if you're not happy.
Why would you do that?
If you're not happy, or if you think there's something more, or if your whole life's been about the climb.
But see, I look at it differently, right? I mean, is it because, okay, I did this. Yes. Okay. So now you want a different challenge. But the other thing is, as an older person, when you get older and you start to reminisce about your life, you can see the end, right? You and Levi, you've got your whole lives ahead of you. You really do. I mean, especially compared to me. When you get older, it's like, okay, what did I spend my time doing? Mm-hmm. And so obviously he and his wife both had remote jobs, and was living, as far as the neighbors and everybody would say in the public, living the American dream. Maybe he didn't feel like what he was doing was going to give him anything to reminisce about when he was older. Mm-hmm. And what happens when you go to New York City and live? What do you encounter when you go to New York City?
Well, everything.
I mean, you have what? You have thousands, millions of different people. You have different cultures. You have any music you'd want, any food you'd want, right? So every day when you step out of your apartment and you step down on the street and you walk a block to the grocery store, how many different cultures would you come in contact with? How many different experiences could you have that you'd never get in suburban America?
Well, part of what it sounds like is, I think, he does all this in this climate, and you make it to the American dream, and then you sort of sit there and look at it and wonder, is this it? Is this the purpose?
Right. Is this all there is to life?
Is this all there is? So not that that's not noble, you know what I mean? Because obviously that's what we preach and share. And for some people, that's more than enough. I mean, how many people do Lance and I work with on a regular basis who will never do that, right? They will have started at or above where this guy started and not make it even remotely as close to the American dream as he made it. And then he makes it there and gives it up. So, I mean, I think for some people it'd be hard to understand, but it's that, are you alive to make money and find stability, or are you alive to live? But perspective is the other thing, right? Because you're after this thing that you've been sold is the end all be all. But then maybe once you get there too, I think part of what he's realizing is, like, when you had nothing, you had to value, for example, the time or the little experiences that you had together, because, okay, yeah, you're living in a church basement and bathing with a bucket of water. So, like, your material life is not very exciting or good, and by a lot of measures, probably to most of us sounds pretty not great, But
are you like Madonna? Do you have to be a material girl with a material guy and live in a material world?
If you're finding your purpose, or if you're finding what gives your life meaning, I don't want to say your purpose, but what gives meaning to your life, you're more likely to appreciate the value of non-material things, like your relationship with somebody else, or the experiences that you have together. So then the flip side of that is once you get there and you have all this material stuff and you're worried about all these things, you know, does it run into you at some point that like, man, I don't know that this is really better. You know, like, yeah, I got all this stuff and that's nice, but now I'm worried about all this stuff that I never before would have cared about. And maybe I'm also not valuing some of the little things that I used to put more emotion or attach more meaning to. So I think that's that component of it too. Now, the thing that we need to talk about is, does that mean that you need to move to New York City to do that? You know, I mean, is that the answer? I mean, for this guy, apparently it was, but you know, the other side of that is people are listening. It's like, well, so or what you're saying is if I'm not happy, what I should do is, you know, blow up my
chuck it all
financial well-being and move to someplace that's super expensive. And that way I can be happy. Like, well,
move to wherever you want to go. Try it out.
Yeah.
Well, this is what, and we're going to go to break and think about this. This is what I got from the article. But I think this is what's interesting is Justin read this article and had a whole different take on the focus of the show. So I led with what I found important. Now I've got a couple other things that I would think, but we're going to talk in the next segment about what Justin read from this and at least what he told me he got from this and wanted to talk about. And so then you can see how when you read something, two different people can get two different perspectives. And then stay tuned because at some point we're going to bring Levi in and say, which way do you want to live your life? You're 18 next week and your whole life is ahead of you. You're going to be a high school senior. Are you going to do what this guy did or where are you going in the road of life? Stay tuned.
Levi's like, man, what a test.
We'll be back in just a second. Well, we've been talking about Will Flanagan's decision from his hard Midwest Scrabble upbringing.
Scrabble babble.
Yeah. Spell Scrabble.
Scrabble.
Scrabble is a game, Levi. Okay. I'm not even going to say blue. Keep that in there. I like that.
I spelled it right. I'd like to point out.
Okay.
Which would be sad if you didn't spell
Scrabble correctly.
That's right.
There's some.
We should add Levi spelling.
Yeah.
Can you spell Scrabble, Levi?
We've been talking about Will Flanagan and his decision once he had made it from his hard Scrabble upbringing as a latchkey kid in southeastern Ohio to just chuck it all and go to New York City. And, you know, and I talked about how, you know, maybe life's not about making everything, but it's about having the experience. Now, if you can do both, that's fine. And, you know, and I feel like I did that. I mean, I feel like my life had value. I helped young people my whole life. I taught them, I coached them, and, you know, mentored them. And many of them I still do, even though they're in their 40s and 50s, I'm still doing some mentoring with them. So I feel fulfilled, and I've also achieved the American dream. So for me, I'm still not chasing it. But that's what I got from this article. Justin read this article and he said, my goodness, the cost of living in New York City is 161% higher than Cleveland. And you have a 2,000 square foot house that you're paying $1,150 a month for. And you're going to move to New York City and pay $4,250 for a 1-bedroom apartment. He goes, how can the cost of two major metropolitan areas in the same country be so expensive in one end compared to the other?
Well,
so, I mean,
I think the other side is in some ways what I thought about too with this article, because that point is driven home, but it's two very different experiences. I mean, in a lot of ways, what you shared, Lance, is in some ways you're kind of looking at maybe doing the same thing this guy did. Like you're looking at leaving a small, now granted, you're going to go to another Midwestern town. You're actually going to go to where this guy was leaving, probably.
Yeah.
But
maybe his house is for sale.
well, that's
Maybe
what I was going to say. You're in the market.
Yeah.
You call him up. Hey,
Well, he says he's renting it right now to somebody else. So it sounds to me like he's not fully vested in the New York move
because he's got the fallback plan just in case.
He's renting his house out and didn't sell it. So,
well, see, you could just go rent it.
yeah, that would be a possibility.
Yeah, you have an aversion to that, though, I think.
To renting?
Yes.
At this stage in my life, I'm not going to rent for very long.
So it could be okay.
It might be all right. No, I'm not. I don't have.
Well,
an
I said it's a
aversion to
2,000 square foot house, right?
Right.
I mean, that sounds up your alley.
Yeah, I'm not.
You won't have to have too many storage units that way.
I started out renting, and
from renting I came, from renting I shall return.
Why not? Somebody else is responsible to fix everything. Somebody's responsible for the upkeep.
The point was that, I mean, I think you highlighted in some ways, you can obviously relate to some of what this guy's sharing and thinking about. In a lot of ways, granted, I'm not nearly as old as this guy, but my story is the opposite in some ways of this one. I grew up so it starts not all that undifferent and growing up in a small, rural-based community. But then I left and I went to, the metropolises and spent time, in Cincinnati.
WKRP in Cincinnati.
Exactly. And in the Miami metro area in Florida, and time, a good bit of time in DC, and it's like, and time in New York. And then after all that, I moved back to the place I came from and still trying to build the financial security and future that I want. And when I think about, I have like no desire whatsoever, none, to move to New York City. Like there is so little interest in something like that, partly for the financial reason.
But it's a very similar situation. Anywhere you would go.
Sure.
San Francisco, LA, Miami, that you mentioned, New York, Washington, D.C., expenses, Seattle, San Diego would be, Houston would be huge. So, I mean, do you have any desire to go to any place like that?
My finances
just don't be hating on New York City. We may have a lot of good, strong listeners, and I
still go to New York City. I was just in New York City last year because we did a multi-day stay and went to Broadway, and I enjoyed that, but I was happy to leave.
So your aversion is not to New York City, it's to all of those major places, or is it just to New York City?
I think it's to having to live like that be your, see, because I think it's interesting that he kept and is renting the place in Cleveland. I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's such a minor detail in the article that somebody might, just, whatever.
Well, but part of his reason for doing it is because he knew he wasn't going to make enough money to live in Manhattan. So he can, he's still building equity into the home, but he's also getting an influx of income. Right.
Yeah. I think the hard thing is, and I've thought about this several times, like, my life's changed a lot in the past 5 years from where it was, which isn't unusual in your 20s. I mean, I think that's a big part of what it is kind of getting your life set up for the way it's going to go for the next 5, 10, 20 years. And mine's definitely followed that track in my mid to late 20s. There's been a lot of changes. And I think, I reflect, and it's like, there's a lot of great things. And by many measures of where I'm at, there's good success. But then when I think of, could I have achieved these things if I was still, for example, in Cincinnati? And Cincinnati by no means is nearly as expensive as New York, but just taking that as an example. And I mean, the answer, I don't have to contemplate, I don't have to research. The answer is no. The answer is no. I could not have what I have today if I was there. And I guess the point that brings, because in the same way, this guy was able to find financial security in the Midwest, and then was able to make the decision to experience things someplace else. That, to me, is a very important anecdotal story that this brings up about where is our country at? Because when we think about history, which we talk about so much on this show, city's supposed to be the land of opportunity, the place to go, right? The place to to become everything that you've ever dreamed of, to realize your potential. And in a lot of ways, I don't know that that sales pitch holds up today. I don't know that that's a great thing to sell a young person on from a financial standpoint. I'm not saying that the opportunity in terms of culture, society, whatever, like, sure, those things small towns are going to have a harder time anytime competing on. But in a lot of ways, the story that he shares is he wouldn't be able to do what he's doing now. He wouldn't be living in Manhattan if he had been in New York the whole time, because he wouldn't have the kind of money he has, because he couldn't have, because his cost of living would have been, crazy high if he had been in New York this whole time. So on the other hand, it's that, do you look back and like, man, I made a mistake. Why did I spend so much of my life in this other place? Or is it would have been a mistake had I spent so much time in New York when I was younger? I don't know, but that'd be a question that I have for him, is like, because I don't think he really answers that, but do you feel like you should have been in New York sooner, or do you think that your life has gone about the way it had to go to get to where you are? Well,
he said, typically we judge ourselves in a very short term. And he said, then it's a matter of perspective. When you're 60 and looking back, and that's where I am, how does this help or hinder the trajectory of your career? And then he ends it with, I think, and this is kind of answers your question. He says, I just have to remember, I've bet on myself. Now I need to deliver. No pressure. So, I mean, is it the chase that we're all after?
Well, I don't think we're all after it. I mean, he's after it. You and I have been after it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people that aren't, but I think different people chase different things. And
okay, but it's still the chase. I mean, you've had multiple careers in a very young life. Okay.
Careers is a generous term for the things that I engaged in, but I appreciate that. Yeah.
You're not 30 yet, and you've tried at least 4 or 5 different things. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to go back into when you were in high school and had your own businesses.
Oh, okay. We're not
going to compare that. No, I mean, that's the equivalent to me,
So basically we were comparing it to Levi's life. Nothing that Levi's done would count yet, but the day he turns 18 will count what happens after
and
that.
In the last 10 years, you've done 3 or 4 major things, attempted 3 or 4 major things in your life. Whereas
fairly different things too.
Right. Whereas I started a career and then I manipulated it within the same career.
Right.
But constantly
you added and took away and
to find
shifted,
to find new challenges. Yeah. But it was a constant of betting on myself, right? And taking like either starting a new class or developing a curriculum or teaching a different age group or coaching a team that nobody else wanted and turning them into, a formidable opponent. And so it was about the chase, because I would get bored and say, I want something else. And I remember my mom saying that. I said, Mom, you taught school for 40 years. She goes, yeah, but I never taught the same thing more than 6 or 7 years. Mm-hmm. I changed grades. I became a reading specialist. Right. So are we all chasing that? In some form or fashion, is he just, the title of the article, I moved from Ohio to New York City. Was that financially crazy?
Maybe that's not the right question.
Right. That's not the question.
I mean, yeah, it's financially crazy.
It is, but he's looking for a challenge.
Just to answer that
But I think that's
question.
where we are. I think we all are there.
Yeah.
I think we're all looking for a challenge. I have a daughter who is now entering her longest employment because every 3 to 5 years, she switches jobs. Why? Because she's done everything that she can do at that place. And so she's bored.
Well, you've reached whatever you've reached the ceiling.
Right. And now she's entering middle age and she's like, it's expensive to move every 5 years. It's expensive. Right. And so the talk was, okay, you're in a big enough company now. Find your challenges within the company. You don't have to up and go live in another, but she's adventuresome, right? She likes to live. She's lived in different parts of the country. My other daughter, been teaching school in the same place for 10 years, but she's starting a brand new curriculum within the same school district where she's been. She's, so again,
she's taking dad's path maybe a little bit.
But it's still, she's still challenging herself. And she's still betting on herself. She's a 1-person department. Mm-hmm. I mean, if they decide to, need to save money, easy to get rid of her and the whole department's gone. Right. But she's betting on herself. And she's betting on her ability to keep the program growing. So don't we all, I mean, my question is, don't we all do that?
Well, maybe that's what we need to ask our producer.
Well, that's what we're going to come back to.
That, right?
That's what we're coming back to. We've given him a segment and a half now. He's got the whole world in front of him. Just about to turn 18.
In his hands?
Well, he doesn't have them in his hands, but how's he going to get the whole world in his hands?
That's the question.
Who's going to win, Levi or the world?
Well, what's that look like for him?
And what's his plan? Right. What's he going to do? Stay tuned.
Well, he's yawning right now, so his plan's maybe sleep.
That's right. So stay tuned, and we'll hear from Levi here in the final segment. Well, we've been talking about the two different ways to look at this article. You know, for me, it was like...
But is there more than two?
Well, we talked about more than two because you looked at it from more of the financial standpoint. I had talked about it as, you know, you chase your dreams, and we kind of ended with a third and kind of came together and said, maybe it's just about going out there and betting on yourself and needing new challenges in life to make it a life worth living. But now the segment everybody's been waiting for, if you tuned in the beginning of the show, and that is we're going to hear from our 17 almost, well, by the time this show goes out, he will be 18, senior in high school, starting his senior year in high school.
Woo.
Where do you want to go? Where do you want to be when you're 30?
The question that every high school senior loves.
And where are you going to be when you're me, when you're 62 and you've had the career? What do you see? What's
important to you in life?
Where are you going? You stay in a small Midwestern town? You going to move around?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't plan to stay here.
You're not going to stay here.
I don't plan to.
Why is that? Let's start with that one. Why?
I don't think, where we live has enough experiences that I'm looking for.
So you're kind of like the author. He grew up in a small town in Ohio, went to a big town in Ohio, made some money, and said, I need some different experiences. So are you going to skip the success part and just go somewhere off the grids, go somewhere totally different than where you've grown up? And
I don't know. That's a good question.
You're not going to stay here, so where are you going? You're going to Mutual?
Someplace else.
You got to go to St. Paris?
Someplace else. That's right. Good answer.
I mean, these are towns 10 miles away, folks. That's why.
Now more than ever, since I'm 18, you know, that decision's really coming up. It's like, you know,
the world is your oyster.
Yeah, it is. Where are you going? I mean, you don't want to be here. Well,
like, is Cincinnati far enough? I guess maybe ask that. Ask it a different way. Do you want to go to a big city? Do you want to stay in Ohio? Like,
possibly. I know I want to stay inside Ohio.
Keeping the okay.
I mean, I know this is going to go
stay
on
within
air,
the state,
and I know you have a girlfriend, but I'm going to ask this question anyway.
Ooh,
are you letting your love life determine where you're going to go in the next 5 years?
No.
Good.
That has no impact on it.
No,
none at all.
We'd like to go to the same place, of course, but
so we might be looking at
She wants to move outside of town too, so we're both on the same boat.
Well, I live outside of town.
Oh,
and my house is for sale if you want to buy it. No, my question, I mean, I've talked to a lot of young people throughout my lifetime, and they're like, well, but, you know, I have this high school sweetheart and, you know, they're my whole life. And so we want to stay together forever. And then 2 years down the road, they're split up and they're stuck at some place that they didn't really want to go anyway, because that's where their significant other was. And they're like, man, I had opportunities that I didn't take. I can think of the story. I was working in a warehouse and a young salesman, and he was in his 40s, and he came to me and we were talking about this kind of thing. And he goes, yeah, I had a girlfriend like that, and she begged me to stay here. And he said, I turned down a full ride to Kansas. This was in Columbus, Ohio. Kansas wanted me to play college baseball. And I stayed here, went to Ohio State, where I couldn't make the baseball team. And he said, I stayed here, and 3 months after I started Ohio State as a freshman, she broke up with me. And that made me think, it's like, okay, all the decisions we make, even at the age of 18, are going to determine where we get to and what we have when we get to 62. So what are you going to be? I mean, are you open to anything? Do you have a plan that you want to stick to? Are you going to be like Robert Frost? And when you come to a fork in the road, are you going to take the road less taken? You know, what do you want to do? What are your thoughts?
At this point, I mean, I'm still in the phase of
9 months from now, you got to know because it's all over.
Right.
They're kicking you out of school.
Right. I know.
Where you've been for 13 years. You're not allowed to go there anymore.
And I'd hate to say, but I feel like I'm a little late to the party because I'm right now I'm in that phase of, you know, what do I want to do? And I'm exploring options. So,
but you got 45 years ahead of you.
I know.
That's the age difference between you and me. Okay.
Jeez.
So you got a lot of life to live, right?
Did you see
I know. He goes, wow. I can't even imagine being, you know, Justin isn't even 45 yet, right? So
he's not very far off from me either.
No, he's closer to you than he is to me, right? But I mean, what do you want to do? Where do you see yourself being 10 years from now?
Well, is the priority for you going to be experiences or money, do you feel like, in the next few years? Just the next few years, not forever, but just the next few years.
Am I allowed to pick both?
Well, that's what, right? That's the dream. For me, though, it was, Levi, I mean,
But experiences cost money.
And exactly.
Yeah.
So it's hard to have both.
Well,
at the same time.
Well, sometimes if you go for the experiences that cost money and you don't have the money, you're going to get a whole other kind of experience.
Assuming
then you're going to be showering in the basement of the Presbyterian church with a bucket.
Right. I mean, assuming I still have time, what if now I can just make it about achieving the dream since I have time to invest?
Why not chuck it all, put 3 pairs of jeans and a couple t-shirts in a backpack and take all the money that you make this next year and buy an airplane ticket to Europe with a brand new pair of shoes. Take everything you own in a backpack, go to Europe,
have fun,
and say,
good luck.
I'll see everybody in about 5 years. I'm off the grid. Go for it.
That's a possible, yeah.
Never a cheaper time, never a better time to do it. Yep. Nor a cheaper time because you don't have anybody else you'd have to pay for.
You can achieve both aspects there too. There's opportunities there.
Right. Or do the same thing here in the United States. Sure. Use Mo and Joe, slip the backpack on and start walking. Pick a direction, pick a road and start going. And in 5 years, come back and tell us everything that you've done. Are you that adventuresome?
I wouldn't say that.
I wasn't. No, I mean, I wasn't. Nothing wrong with it. Are you that adventuresome?
I'd like to be.
Justin's kind of done that, you know.
But I also like staying close
Justin
to home
took it a
and
step
close to
further.
family.
Justin didn't save the money. Justin got a credit card and put a lot of it on that and then had to fix that. But those the say I was hedging toward that direction, Levi, of the experiences component. I mean, there were things I wanted to pursue, but it was more about like, yeah, you know, I'll figure it out. Like, I'm not too worried. And in a lot of ways, I think I still feel that way, but the urgency of experience has diminished. Like, it's just not, there's time, you know, we'll get them done, but it doesn't all have to be tomorrow and you don't have to go into debt necessarily to do it. So, but that's, I think, Isn't that what grown-ups about, is figuring out what balance of those things you want is. You can go wild and free and crazy. And I mean, I know a couple people, you know, that had done sort of that thing that Lance is talking about and basically, you know, lived almost homeless for years because that's what they wanted to do, you know, but it was, where can I bounce to? Who can I meet that's a friend and stay with and go to all these places? And they've been to, I don't know, 7 or 8 different countries now, you know, Europe, Australia, and like they're 24 and they have no college degree and they have no career, but they've been to a lot of amazing places and had some tremendous experiences and probably gained a lot of life wisdom, you know, in the people they've met and talked to. So it's easy to look down on doing that too. I think people, you know, you got to be serious because your life's getting started now. It's like, on the other hand, you know, if you're going to do it, to Lance's point, now's about as good a time as any because it only gets more complicated later, you know?
Well, I think you guys aren't mentioning the personality that comes with it, because some people just like riding life's wave, you know what I mean? And some others plan ahead. So, I mean, deciding what you're doing as you go is kind of like, I guess, what I'm doing right now, but I think that affects.
Is it, and that's a good point, or is it I was sitting here while you guys were talking and I counted up, my family moved 7 times in my first 12 years of life. And then I lived in Columbus for the next 12 years of my life. That was after my parents moved there. And I moved here where I am now and have lived 3 places here over the last 30 some odd years. So I lived 7 different places for 12 years. And in the last 50 years of my life, I've lived in 2. So was it all the moving I did when I was young that when I got the opportunity to make the decision, did I decide I wanted to stay put because I'd moved enough?
Mm.
You know, so you know, your point is,
Yeah.
And it's a valid point, but it made me start thinking, well, am I a homebody now and want to stay home because I moved so much as a kid? I didn't want to put my kids through that because I had a choice at one time. I thought I wanted to be a college basketball coach. And so, but I was a little bit older than Justin and I had 2 girls and I was like, okay, to make it, I'm going to have to switch jobs every 2 or 3 years, be an assistant here, then move up, be an assistant at a bigger school. And I didn't want to put my girls through what I had gone through.
Are children going to be an important part of your future or not? You know, those are questions too, because that changes things.
But now I'm 62 and I'm going to go off on an adventure here again, my second adventure in 12 months, because I've got the money and now I have the time and don't have the responsibilities.
See, and my grandpa was in the Air Force and my mom was constantly moving around. Now she just stays put.
The grass is always greener. It makes it easier to appreciate something when you experience the
So is it the
opposite.
way we're brought up that causes us on how we're going to live our life in the future? Maybe that's the question everybody needs to answer.
So why we have this show, Lance, or are you supposed to? I think you're supposed to ask me.
I was going to ask myself that question and then answer it.
Because if you ask me, then you'd have to do the rest of the closing.
Right.
And I
don't have a clue.
Down.
No. So why did we do this show today, Lance? Well, we did it because True Chat has a mission. We have a mission to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And you've heard that today from 3 different generations. And so hopefully you've learned something. Maybe it'll, have you question you. Are you ready to pack up and go and start a new adventure? Or are you happy staying put? You got to decide for yourself. You only get one life. You got to live it to its fullest. If you like today's show and your family and friends are asking, well, how can I listen to that? Because I think I want to listen to it firsthand. Tell them as a podcast, they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning as a podcast. Those same episodes are heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the United States and parts of Canada. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance, the host, Jackson.
Special thanks to recording producer and Gen Z expert Levi LaForge. Thanks, of course, to our senior producer and also Gen Z, but older Gen Z, Bradley Butch. And thank you, of course, to our audience from all generations for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.